wheat, growing wheat, milling wheat, and being engaged in a community of grain lovers has held my attention for a number of years and is still doing so. And just new things to learn about this plant that's been so associated with humanity for 10,000 years.
This is The Producers. I'm Dani Valent. Jason Cotter grows heritage wheat and mills it into flour at Tuerong Farm on the Mornington Peninsula. The peninsula, an hour from Melbourne, is better known as a wine region, but Jason wanted to do something different. His interest in local grain economies and his fascination with the fundamental place of wheat in the human story has taken him down another path.
I'm Jason Cotter. I'm from Tuerong Farm on the Mornington Peninsula. We grow wheat, we mill it on the farm and sell it to bakers, chefs and home cooks locally and into Melbourne. I grew up in Langwarrin, about 20 minutes from here, and in the early 90s my family sold our food company, Cotter Food Services, and we bought this place, and I'd lived here on and off, although I was the only one in my family who'd done so. And then about 10 years ago, I came back here and we renovated the house and started a family and got more and more involved in farming, which really began as a hobby and then has sort of taken over and sort of takes all our time now. Here at Tuerong we have beef cattle as well as crops, and we also have wine grapes. I've never been that interested in the wine industry, and I guess when I moved back here and started being involved in the farm again, I wanted to do something that was my own, and I just put a little bit of wheat in actually to train my dog who's just turned up on quail, but at the same time I read a book about the future of food that Dan Barber wrote, the American chef, and it got me thinking about local grain economies and the possibility of shorter supply chains of key commodities like wheat, and to treat wheat as a ingredient rather than something that's just traded and has no meaning as food. So I guess one of the main things we do here is trying to restore wheat as something that's considered a valuable foodstuff and not just a commodity.
Few people think about the Mornington Peninsula as a wheat-growing region these days, but it actually has a history with grain growing. Much of Jason's project has been testing rare and heritage wheats in this particular environment to see how they fare.
We're well outside the wheat belt here in Tuerong. The conditions are a bit different than where grain is grown mostly in Australia, though fairly similar to other parts of the world. I guess growing wheat on the peninsula has a long history, although in the last 50, 70 years or so, it's only small pockets for usually for feed rather than milling into flour for bread. However, when the governor in Sydney sent a few boats out to look for a second colony, which ended up being Hobart, they found sealers and escaped convicts growing wheat on Phillip Island, which is just a stone throw from here, quite successfully. And what we do here is grow wheat that is adapted to our climate, and we've grown a lot of specialist varieties to find what best suits our land and season length, and sort of over the last few years amassed quite a collection of rare wheats, some old, some new, some really old, and it's been great to have build what I guess is a library of the history of the world. I guess in many ways wheat is at the heart of human culture, where since the advent of agriculture, wheat has been there and has been through the formations of city-states, trade surpluses, trade itself, formations of countries. Wheat is at the heart of it, and I guess more recently kicked off the Arab Spring in Egypt and across North Africa. Wheat and the dearth of wheat had a lot to do with that, so it's still at the heart of things.
Wheat is endlessly interesting, so much more than a commodity, intersecting with history, geography, science and aesthetics, as well as nutrition and food culture. Local grain economies not only connect consumers to their produce, but also allow farmers to stay connected to the food they nurture and grow.
Look, I've always had a deep interest in it. It's something that gets under the fingernail, so to speak. But yeah, the wheat aspect of it really drew me in. There's so much to wheat. There's there's the production and the food side of it, but then there's the the aesthetics for wheat, the beauty of wheat, the culture, the cultural connections. It's really intrinsic to who we are, grain growing, and so I got interested in that. And I guess once you start collecting a variety of wheats, you're engaging intellectually on where things are from, why were they grown, how they were grown, who grew them, and deeper still on their flavours, nutritional values, and just an amazing diversity in wheat. If you look at the human genome and how complex that is, and how it's not very often you run into your doppelganger, well, wheat's even more complex genetically than humanity. So there's a lot there, and we're only really, exploiting a narrow band of wheat genetics. And if you look back through the history of wheat, there's so much there that we could draw on for resilience in our agriculture, but also things like flavour potential, greater nutritional value. We can reintroduce a lot of those things that in some ways we've lost, or at least can improve upon. Wheat is a key global commodity, although Australia is a minnow in global grain trade. It's still an important part of our agriculture in Australia. However, there's few farmers that know what their grain tastes like, and I've found that there's a lot of farmers that really want to know what their grain tastes like, and I guess that engagement as people's produce as food is resurgent in many ways. What would you say? If you look at the commodification of wheat, Australia, even deep into the 70s, had a real huge diversity in genetics and origins in wheat that made for a resilient crop in many ways, although incursions of new rust varieties put an end to that in some ways. But so did the Green Revolution and the advent of semi-dwarf genetics that were high yielding, that could handle high nitrogen inputs and required mechanisation and more systemic use of ag chemicals. And what we're trying to do is minimise inputs and returning to a farming system that we feel is sustainable, and also is a nutritious and flavoursome product. It's not like you sit down and have a meal and think to yourself, gee, that was sustainable. You think to yourself, gee, that tasted good. So if you can have things taste good and be sustainable, then we're onto something.
There are thousands of varieties of wheat in existence, and Jason has grown more than 600 of them, getting to know which ones work best at Tuerong, both in terms of growing well in the conditions and also for flavour and digestion.
Yeah, so in terms of the diversity of wheats we're growing, there's a few. We've got hundreds basically, Dani. We've grown in the last 5 years 600 different types of wheat, so it's gotten a little out of hand. However, within there, there's some just true gems. Most wheat in Australia for the milling market is hard white wheat. Although in the rest of the world, most of the milling wheat in, say, in the northern hemisphere is hard red wheat, and red wheat's actually grows better in this area because of the season length and also its ability to handle more provocative conditions like rain late in the season and what have you. But it also offers a different flavour profile. So we've grown red wheats from, for the last 300 years, and some of them like Rouge de Bordeaux, which is a French wheat that has a good season length for here. It's a softer wheat. It also doesn't have sort of antagonists to your digestion, so it's found it's easier to digest, and we're looking forward to introducing that to eaters very soon. We've also got one that I imported through quarantine from Bread Lab in the US called Skagit 1109. It's a population of hard red wheats that have significant diversity within in-field, and they adapt to the conditions in which they grow. So it's interesting thing agronomically, but also I think it's the only wheat that's been bred as a wholemeal flour and with flavour at the core of decision making. So it's another one we're looking forward to introducing soon. A few other cereals that we're interested in from a flavour point of view is we've got some long season heritage rye, a German one, and some Swedish and Danish rye that have high ferulic acid content and a few other desirable things for the distilling market. So it's early days for that, but I suspect there's a market there for flavour-driven grain in that vein as well.
A few years ago, Jason and his wife Emma travelled around the world collecting wheat to try at home. But the process of getting wheat safely into Australia is complex and time-consuming. Turning a teaspoon of seeds into a commercial crop takes years on top of that.
So in 2018, Emma and I went on a collecting trip overseas through North America and later in Europe, and collected lots of different varieties of wheat. To bring them into Australia isn't that straightforward because of biosecurity and the wheat industry being very important to Australia. People are very concerned about bringing in problems, not benefits. So the process is you have a permit to import Triticum species. Your samples are sent by courier to nursery stock at Mascot in Sydney, where a cursory check is undertaken. Then they get sent to a glasshouse up at Tamworth, a facility run by New South Wales DPI. They get grown out there for a season, and then you get probably 8 seeds in a pot. They'll grow out, and then you get whatever seed comes from the next generation once they've checked it. So you start with a very small amount of seed, and you plant perhaps, you might be 100 seeds, there might be 5 grams or 10 grams or, if you're lucky, 50 grams worth of seed. You put that in a 6 metre plot, and then you start the process of selection and bulking up. So, you see what it grew like that first year, and if it's worth pursuing, if you think it is, then you grow it again, and then again and again. So it takes years and years to get a quantity together that you can even test without going backwards with your seed. Then you test it and bulk it up, this what you've selected, and hopefully it's something people like.
Some wheats beguile because they grow really well. Others suck Jason in because they're beautiful. And some of the most unlikely candidates end up surprising and thriving once they settle in.
There's a few seeds that I fall in love with because I've researched them. I look at their genetics and what their potential performance is and their suitability and, their potential application. I think, this is going to be great. And then you grow them and they just don't go that well here. But because you're in love with them, like from an intellectual level, you grow them again and again. So I've actually got a few out there that I should have discarded ages ago. But there's a few that I persisted with that just didn't like the first few seasons I grew them, or at least they needed to settle in and to self-select genetically to suit here. And so I've got a few this year that are just cranking, that the first few years I grew them weren't great. So, in those first few years, you're actually selecting the decent examples of those lines. So there's a few North African durums that I've got. And I mean, the Italians claim to have the best Parsu durums, but I guess because of the trade across the Mediterranean over millennia, a lot of the durums are actually North African rather than Sicilian or Calabrian. And I've got a few that they're just going so well this year, and they're really beautiful too. Like a couple of them, there's one called Medea that has it's almost like a lavender head. It looks like, a row of lavender rather than wheat. Another one, Baliuni, which has amazing stay green deep into the season, even in wet conditions. The whole sort of thing's endeavour's been great, just to engage with people across food and agriculture. So, from wheat breeders through to restaurants. Some of the restaurants in Melbourne, when they hear what they're doing and the specifics of what we're doing, they get quite excited about individual varieties, not just that you're growing and milling it on 70 kilometres from the city. They get excited about what the actual plant is and where it's from, and the full narrative behind that grain. And I guess it's a good sell for them on their menus.
When you research, farm, harvest, mill, pack, sell, and deliver your own product, there's always something to do. So is there a typical day on Tuerong Farm?
At different times of the year, there's different activities dominate on the farm. In the background is always milling. And sometimes I like to get a lot of milling done just so I can get something else done. So I spend long hours in the mill with headphones on. We're just upgrading it now, so it's got a nicer workplace. So I'm actually putting a bit of LED light in the mill, so there's a bit more than hard light up there. I guess in autumn it's all about getting seed in the ground. So you're waiting for a break in the rain, hoping that it's not going to be too much rain, preparing a seed bed and then sowing the seed and then waiting for it to come up. Hopefully it merges well and get springs away before the weeds get moving too. That's a very busy time of year. And this year we've sown wheat across several farms on the peninsula and further afield. So it's a bit of rushing around. But when the wheat does start coming up well, and then you start seeing differences in varieties or your main milling wheat performing really well, it's very satisfying. Actually, this year on the plot seeder, I buried one of my favoured purple wheats far too deep for it to emerge, and nothing else emerged. Everything else was emerged except for this wheat, and I thought, what's going on here? So I went down and I was like scrabbling along the row in my hands and knees until I found the sort of little white coleoptils way down deep. And so I was wondering, should I just hand hoe this whole 200 metre plot to get some seed away? And I did for a little bit. And then I thought, you know what, I'll just let it run. It'll self-select for long coleoptil, which is actually favourable. And it survived. Like, wheat's a resilient plant, and the will to live is strong. So I've selected for a really long coleoptil by accident, and it's actually looking like a really great crop. And other times of the year, the busiest times, I guess, are harvest. It's always a bit daunting because our harvest window is months long. It's not just a week where we harvest everything or what have you. Because we've got so many different varieties, they've all got to come off at different times, and it's a race against birds or weather or waiting till moisture content drops low enough. And so that's very busy. And this year we'll be here, up the road, at a few other farms, and then up at Rutherglen and across at Caramut in the Western District, where we're increasing the seed of 4th and 5th year wheats that we started with from 5 grams of seed, and now I've got hectares of it. So it's a pretty exciting harvest coming up this year.
Wheat is so often sold as a commodity or basic foodstuff that it's not so common to think of it as having distinctive flavours. But those who go deep into wheat notice that it does vary a lot according to variety and terroir.
So in terms of flavour of individual grains, I find even if you just chew on the grain and you can tell what it might end up be, whether it's worth pursuing. So there's kind of a sweetness to it, or it lacks, a bit of finish, or all the things that you look for in flavour in, wine, or, when people speak of terroir or the complexity of flavour, you can really home in on that in something like wheat. And, for sure it's subtler, and for sure people have better noses or responses to aromatics or taste. I know Betsy Evans in Oak at Swan Bakery in Gippsland, she's got a really good tongue for it, and so does Mike Russell at Baker Blue and some of his staff. I've taken grain in to them before and say, do you want this one or this one, even before it's milled, and they have something to say about the taste of it. Michael James, the baker and author, gives very detailed notes on flavour. So, I definitely have an idea of what I like, but then to get, experts, their feedback as well is fantastic. Wheat is beautiful, really. Yeah, there's few plants as beautiful as wheat, en masse or even individually. And for me, the greatest part of that beauty is the diversity in wheat. If it doesn't matter what sort of day you had, if you go down into the trial plots where there's 200 different types of wheat growing, it's quite calming to be amongst such beautiful plants. There's ones that have got long horns that are hairy or chunky or black or golden or red. There's ones that sort of have a lax vibe, others that are quite upright. There's ones that are strappy in their growth, others that have got fine straw. There is definitely something that has captured my sense of beauty for sure, that makes it all the more engaging to be growing wheat.
There's growing wheat, there's harvesting it, but it's milling that turns wheat into flour. How does Jason tackle this crucial part of the process?
We operate a couple of stone mills and a roller mill. At our end of the market, milling is about retaining a fair amount of bran and germ in the flour so that you retain the nutrition and flavour and the individual identity of whatever you're milling. So rather than reduce things down to the endosperm or the white part in the middle of the seed where you end up with a white flour, you end up with a creamy flour, or even a quite chunky flour that with its flavour and its nutritional value is as important as its performance as flour. So in doing that, you actually retain the full nutritional package in the grain, so you don't have to add like folic acid or niacin and things like that, is done with regular white flour out of an industrial milling process. The stone mills we have are different to most stone mills that operate. They're extremely slow, and the rocks are heavier and bigger. And we also have a sieve integrated into the mill, so that I return any bran that doesn't come through the initial cut into the mill until I achieve a desirable extraction level, so usually above 85% extraction. And we also have, so it ends up being a fine flour, but it's actually high extraction rather than what you might think of as a chunky wholemeal flour. We do 100% wholemeal flours too, particularly our French red flours, our triticale, and spelt rye, and because that's what people desire. But as a general baking flour, if we aim for an 85% extracted flour, it's something that's high performance if we've hit our protein marks, so decent quality protein, which comes from both the grain you choose to grow, but also the nutrition in the soil that helps it achieve its potential.
Connecting people to flour and the wheat it's milled from is a great pleasure and motivator for Jason. In the future, he plans to have a 0 miles on-site bakery that completes the supply chain one loaf at a time.
Yeah, we love having visitors to Tuerong Farm. I think people generally are detached from what happens prior to the bakery. So whether they're bakers that come or home cooks, they don't realise what goes into producing flour in the mill or let alone in the paddock. So to actually show them wheat, what it looks like, where it starts from, it's important to us as farmers, but I can see that it's one of the ways that people can engage with the natural world now is through their food, and to actually be able to show you that whole process, from the field to the mill and then into the bakery in the future is going to be amazing for our business, but also to, tell the story of wheat to people. And the plan is to have a destination bakery that's part of the local food movement, and an extension of, the small grains scene, and to have visitors that can see the wheat, see it being milled, buy the bread. We also intend to set up a display space that's, tells that story of agriculture and displays the botanical diversity of wheat itself, and present a bit of our wheat library for people to enjoy. I don't know, I'd also like to include some sort of ag art thing as well, because I think there's a lot culturally and artistically in agriculture that people would enjoy as well if it was a destination bakery. And I imagine in the future we'll be building an on-farm bakery. We're just lining up our ducks there at the moment. It's, for me, a farm our size, we have to value add as much as we can. So, turning the grain into flour, selling it as a premium product milled in a particular way. But then going further and turning that into bread will help us have a viable business long into the future, in that sort of, value chain from paddock to plate, so to speak. It's the greatest value benefit is at the end, and the greatest risk is at the start. So the farmer takes all the risk, and unless they're growing on a large scale, if they're not adding value along the way and having a share of the value, it's a difficult business.
Jason Cotter finds the intellectual and practical on-farm aspects of his grain business endlessly engaging, but there's something incredibly special about delivering his product to Melbourne bakeries, not least because of the babka and buns that might make it home in the van.
I love going on a delivery run. In fact, I really don't like sending bags of flour off with a courier. I like to load it up the night before, and when I get in the car early in the morning and the whole thing's loaded with flour and the trailer of flour, it just smells like fresh and alive in the car because I've just milled it in the last day or so. And I drive in, I see our customers, have a bit of a chit-chat, go into their bakeries, help them with a few things, and just get sent home with just heaps of bread and treats. So I stuff myself silly on the way home with chocolate babka or fougasse or what have you. It's a really enjoyable part of the whole thing. And, the kids in Emma often say, "Oh, can you bring back some cardamom buns or something like that?" And I might get, 5 or 6 of them, but they won't all make it home, that's for sure. So, it's wonderful. I love what I do because it's really engaged me, like, physically, intellectually for a number of years, and my interest hasn't waned. And I'm someone who gets very deep into whatever I'm into at the time, and it might be 6 or 12 months down the line, I'll find something else I get deeply engaged with and move on. But growing wheat, milling wheat, and being engaged in a community of grain lovers has held my attention for a number of years and is still doing so. And there's just, there's forever new facets to explore with grain, and new seasons to respond to, in the paddock, new things to learn in the mill, and just new things to learn about this plant that's been so associated with humanity for 10,000 years.
Wheat is an integral part of the human story. Complex, responsive, engaging and satisfying. For Jason Cotter, farming wheat at Tuerong Farm is a way of reclaiming aspects of the food system that have been lost and forging a more hopeful, connected and delicious future. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Dani Valent. Stay tuned as we talk to some of Australia's best farmers, makers and growers. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast or contact us via deepintheweeds.com.au.